just constantly stress here is the importance of Bible authority for everything we do and everything that we teach. We instruct about Bible authority. We demand to have Bible authority for everything that is a part of our teaching practice here at College View. Since that is the case, it is a worthwhile exercise to ask if specific things we are doing are in fact in harmony with Bible authority. It is not enough to just take for granted, well, that's what we've always done, it must be okay. We ought to actually stop and evaluate and analyze and make sure that all of our teaching and practices are in line with what's taught and authorized in the Word of God. For instance, we were just engaged in congregational singing. We believe that that's right. We do it. I mean, if you're like me, many of you are, raised by Christian parents, and we've always known congregational a cappella singing. That's what we've always done. Vocal music, no instrumental accompaniment. But have you stopped and said, well, wait a minute. Is that what we're supposed to do? Is there authority for that? Is that the right thing to do? Now, we've studied that in the past. We absolutely think that it is. But I'm just saying it's the appropriate thing to say, wait a minute, let's make sure, let's analyze that, make sure that's what we should do. What about the organization of a local congregation with elders and deacons? It's what we do. Is it the right thing? Is it authorized in Scripture? Is it the way it ought to be? So you get my idea that we should actually ask the questions and go through the mental exercise of determining that what we do is authorized by God. All right, tonight I want to ask you about something we do. We do it all the time. Is it right? I want to talk to you about the first day of the week contribution. Is it appropriate to take up a collection? And specifically, is it appropriate to hold and maintain a common treasury? Have you thought about that? We do it. We do that, right? We take up a collection every first day of the week, and we hold funds in a common congregational treasury. Is that authorized? Is that appropriate? Should we be doing it? Can you read in the Bible and show book, chapter, and verse that says that is the right thing to do? And then, how do we spend that money? So tonight, what I want to do for just a very short time, just make some simple observations about the church treasury. I'm talking about, is it right to hold funds in a common treasury? And then I also want to just make a couple observations about how the church is to use those funds, specifically in the area of doing benevolent work, okay? And so that's what we'll do for just a few minutes here this evening. Thanks for being here. Dan already mentioned in the announcements that it is a real blessing to be able to come together at the end of a Lord's Day and assemble one more time, worship God, strengthen and encourage one another, and hopefully glorify our Father who is in heaven. Thanks for being here to be a part of this. We have visitors tonight, and we're grateful for those visitors. We hope you will come back whenever you can. All right, first of all, let's make this statement and then attempt to prove that it is true. In the New Testament, there definitely was a gathering of funds into a common congregational treasury. Now get that. Notice, a gathering of funds into a common congregational treasury. That's the thing that we really want to investigate tonight. There have been some, even maybe several in recent years, who have claimed that it was not done in New Testament churches, that they didn't keep a common treasury. Can we prove that they did? I think that we can. The text that we want to analyze is the one that Rick read for us earlier from 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 1 and 2. 1 Corinthians 16, verses 1 and 2. Read that again. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up, as he may prosper, so that there be no collecting when I come. Think with me about this for a minute. So every one of you put something aside and store it up. Okay, I've heard people say that's not authority for a treasury. That's just saying, So here's my money. I've got this. This is my small pile of money for this week. And out of this small pile of money, I'm going to set aside part of it. I'm going to keep it in a sock in my sock drawer, because it says put something aside and store it up. I'm going to store it up at home. I'm going to dedicate this much money, so I'm going to set it aside and store it up. I'm going to put it in a dirty sock in the sock drawer. That's how I'm going to fulfill that instruction. Would that be okay? Is that what Paul is teaching there? And actually the answer to that is absolutely no. Notice, he said, do this so that there will be no collecting when I come. Oh, wait a minute. So putting it aside in a sock drawer at home wouldn't accomplish what Paul was instructing to do there. The storing up was to be in a common collected place, so that when Paul arrived in Corinth, they wouldn't have to do specific collections. They wouldn't have to go around collecting funds. If they were just storing it up at home, when Paul arrived in Corinth, then they'd all have to bring what they'd been keeping at home. And Paul said, do this so that won't be necessary. I believe that clearly argues that it was collected and held in common. The New Testament doesn't use the English word treasury, but that's what we would say this was. This was a common treasury, a common fund, a holding in a central spot or place, the funds of the local congregation. It is, I think, specifically akin to or parallel to what we call a church treasury. Okay? So I think the first point is established, that clearly there was such a gathering and a holding of common funds. Now, there's a follow-up to that. The argument is made that what Paul was instructing there was a specific need. It says a collection for the saints. And so there was a specific benevolent need. And Paul was telling them, okay, keep these funds in a common treasury until I come, so that the money can be sent to relieve saints. But once that need was alleviated, once that need was met, there's no ongoing authority to hold a common treasury. Do you see the argument? And so some who oppose a continuous church treasury, a perpetual or ongoing church treasury, would say, well, you've got 1 Corinthians 16. We grant you 1 Corinthians 16 until that specific need was met, then that was the end of it. I think we would answer that by saying this, that although the instructions of 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2 were for an authorized work of benevolence, it actually establishes an exclusive pattern for any authorized work of a local congregation. We've said before that the authorized areas of work for a local congregation are evangelism, edification, and benevolence. If we're going to do it as a collective local congregation, it's got to fall into one of those three areas that the Lord has authorized the church to work. We just said when we were reading there in 1 Corinthians 16, this was obviously and agreeably a work of benevolence. They were being told to do a work of benevolence. And they were told how to get the funds to do that work of benevolence. But our point here is that this establishes an exclusive pattern. This establishes an exclusive pattern for how the church is to come by funds in order to do its authorized work. And the reason we would say that is because this is the totality of New Testament teaching concerning how an authorized work of the church is supposed to be funded. We don't have any other information. So we know this was an authorized work, this benevolent work that 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2 addresses. We know this was an authorized work, and this was how it was to be funded. The church has other authorized work to do. How is it supposed to come by funds in order to do its other authorized work? For instance, in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, beginning verse 6, Paul says, or I only and Barnabas, have we not power to forbear working? Who goeth a warfare at any time at his own charges? For it is written in the law of Moses, thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. Doth God take care for oxen? Or saith he it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt, it is written, Even so hath the Lord has ordained, that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel. All right, so in that whole section, what Paul's talking about is paying the preacher, right? I don't know, I'm pretty partial to that text, actually, paying the preacher. That's the thing that I can certainly relate to. Where's the authority for paying the preacher? Well, here's the authority for paying the preacher, right? The Lord has ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel. How are you going to get that money? How's the local church going to get the money to pay the preacher? It's obviously authorized to pay the preacher. Where are you going to get the funds to do that? Well, somebody said, let's have a car wash. Let's have a bake sale. I can't read about that in the New Testament, right? You can't read about churches funding any of their authorized work that way. What can you read in the New Testament about how the church funded its authorized work? First day of the week contribution, right? That's all we've got. That's the totality of New Testament teaching on the subject. 2 Corinthians 11, verse 9. Paul says, I robbed other churches, taking wages of them to do you service. Paul said, when I was at Corinth, other churches paid me wages to serve here in Corinth. How did those churches get that money? The only thing we know about it is first day of the week contributions, right? Same thing in Philippians chapter 4, verses 15 and 16. Now ye Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed Macedonia, no church communicated with me as concerning giving and receiving, but ye only. For even in Thessalonica ye sent once and again to my necessity. Notice, Paul's writing to the church at Philippi, and he says, when I was in Thessalonica, what did the church at Philippi do? They sent once again to his necessity while he was preaching in Thessalonica. And my question is the same to you. How did they get those funds? The only information we have on that is that it came from first day of the week contributions to the saints, money held in a common treasury to be used for the ongoing work of the church. There is always a need. 1 Corinthians 16, 1, 2 talks about a specific benevolent need that existed at the time. But the church always has need for funds to do authorized work. The church always has a need for money to be used for evangelism, money to be used for edification, money to be used for benevolence. There is a perpetual need for the local congregation to do everything that it's capable of doing. And the only way that to have funds for that is a first day of the week contribution held in a common treasury. And so that's our justification for that word, for that process of contributing and holding funds in a common treasury. People have challenged that, but I believe that the authority for it is clear in the New Testament. Again, this may be something that we sort of take for granted typically, but someone says, where's your authority for the treasury? Well, let's think about that. We actually have it, don't we? And that's the reason why I think that's a worthwhile exercise for us. By the way, we said one of the authorized works of the local congregation is evangelism. And as you know, we've talked quite a bit about it in the last several weeks. Wayne is leaving this week to go to preach in Ghana. The church here is supporting him in doing that work. How did we get that money? Well, it's through your generous first day of the week contributions. We have money in a common treasury. I just in fact, just before service began tonight, I handed Wayne a check for some of the expenses that he'll have on this Ghana trip. How would we be able to give him that money if we didn't have a treasury from which to draw those funds? So again, that's our authority. But I think it's a worthwhile exercise to go through that process. Okay, I want to talk with you a little bit about that specific work, not in this case of benevolence, edification rather, but specifically about benevolence. When the church did engage in acts of benevolence, it was always directed toward needy saints. I want you to go back with me to that text again that Rick read, 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. Concerning the collection for the saints, as I've directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside, stored up, as he may prosper, so that there be no collecting when I come. Notice that this work was a collection for the saints. Remember, what we're saying here is every time we see a local church acting as a collective body, spending funds from their common treasury. It was that benevolent work was always exclusively directed toward needy saints. In Romans chapter 15, Paul actually is writing here about the same thing. So we read about this in 1 Corinthians 16. In Romans 15, Paul is talking about the exact same situation. And he says in Romans 15, verse 25, I am going to Jerusalem to bring aid to the saints. For Macedonia and Achaia have been pleased to make some contribution for the poor among the saints at Jerusalem. I think it's interesting that we see this again, an exclusive pattern established whenever the church spent collective funds from the treasury for benevolent work. It was always directed toward needy saints. There's not ever a command, an example, or any necessary inference wherein church funds were used to provide benevolent assistance for non-Christians, for the general public, for those who are not members of the church. There's just not any authority for that, okay? Someone says, well, why can't we? Why can't we? We've got some money saved up in the church treasury. You know, there were some tornado victims here in Murray County a few weeks ago. Why couldn't we spend some of that money from the church treasury to help those people who had their homes devastated by that tornado recently? Why can't we do that? You know what the answer to that is, right? There's no authority for it. The reason we can't do that is there's no authority for us to use collective church funds from the treasury for the assistance of non-Christians. There's just no authority for that. The other night on a Wednesday night class, we were mentioning an episode in Acts chapter 11. This is earlier. This is an earlier episode, a need that existed. Acts 11, beginning verse 27, now in these days, prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch, and one of them, named Agabus, stood up and foretold by the Spirit that there would be a great famine over all the world. This took place in the days of Claudius. So the disciples determined, every one according to his ability, to send relief to the brothers living in Judea, and they did so, sending it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul. There was a great famine over all the world. Who gets affected when there's a great famine, a widespread famine over all the world? Who gets affected by that? Well, everybody gets affected by that, right? But who did the church in Antioch, who did the church send funds to? They sent relief to the brothers living in Judea. The Christians in Judea weren't the only ones who were suffering from that famine, obviously. But in this instance, the relief was sent specifically to them and not to others. And so I think that we can really strongly prove and argue that the only authority, the only book, chapter, and verse, if you will, for church benevolence is that it is to be directed toward needy saints. Now, having said that, and this is where we get misrepresented and badly misused by people who disagree with us on this point. Individual Christians should help all men as they have the opportunity to do so. This is a really important point. What about those people who had their homes devastated in the eastern part of Murray County during the tornado? Well, there were relief agencies who were actually taking up contributions for people to be helped with the needs that they had. Could I contribute to that as an individual? Absolutely, yes. Totally appropriate for me to do so. As an individual, I can and should help every time that there's an opportunity to do so. Remember, we often talk about opportunity. Opportunity consists of an occasion, a situation where there's a need, and secondly, an ability to help that need. You put a situation and an ability together, you have an opportunity. And so when there's an opportunity, as individual Christians, we certainly should participate in helping others with those kinds of needs. In Galatians chapter 6, beginning verse 7, be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto those or them who are of the household of faith. This has been a battleground text for decades. Some have tried to say that this passage authorizes churches from their common treasury to support non-Christians. It doesn't do that. This is a text written to individuals, right? God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. Now notice, now he changes from singular pronouns to plural pronouns, but it doesn't change the context. Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. Does that mean that we collectively will be rewarded? No. We know that judgment will be on an individual basis, right? So let us not grow weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. But it's still talking about an individual situation, right? The Lord's not going to say on the day of judgment, okay, College View Church, okay, everybody goes to heaven. He's not going to do that, right? It'll still be on an individual basis. And so when Paul says, if we shall reap if we faint not, he's still talking about individual situations, right? And that being the case then, this last verse, as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially those of the house of faith, that's talking to us individually. And certainly that passage is the authority for us as individuals to help any and all legitimately needy people. But the church has only authority for relieving needy saints from the collective treasury. One more observation that I want to make, and then the lesson will be yours. When there were situations where churches of the first century acted to relieve needy saints, there was never a middleman institution or agency. Always aid was directed from the giving congregation or congregations to the receiving congregation or congregations. It was never the case that they set up some kind of a man-made organization. So there's a need in Judea. Let's set up the Judean Relief Society. When we'll appoint a board of directors over the Judean Relief Society. Churches will send money to the Judean Relief Society. The board of directors of the society will decide where that money will be sent and how it will be spent. Does that sound right? That doesn't sound right, does it? Because that's not in the Bible. There never was a middleman institution or agency. Look again, we read this a minute ago. In Acts 11, the disciples determined to, everyone according to his ability, to send relief to the brothers living in Judea. And they did so, sending it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul. In this instance, Barnabas and Saul were only couriers carrying the money to Judea. But notice, the church in Antioch made a determination to send relief, and they sent it directly to the elders. They didn't send it to some human organization or institution, not some agency that was established for the purposes of administering the relief. There was no such thing. It was directly from the sending church to those who received it. That's the biblical pattern. That's the authority that we have. One more time, go with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 16. Beginning verse 1, now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside, stored up, as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting. When I come, here's a little bit more information on that. Paul says, when I arrive, I will send those whom you accredit by letter to carry your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable that I should go also, they will accompany me. So notice, he instructs them, collect these funds, hold it in a common treasury, so there won't be any collecting when I come. And when I come, you all write letters giving accreditation to the people that you appoint to carry your funds to Jerusalem. I may go with them, he says. But again, those guys were only couriers taking the money. The money went directly from the church at Corinth to the church or churches where the need existed in Judea. So again, that's just a sort of a summary, a little bit random points, but they're all associated. I hope you agree. to ask the question, where's our authority in such matters? It's really, I think, an important exercise for us to go through that and say, oh, wait a minute. Is this how it's supposed to be done? For sure, we've always done it that way. Is that the way it's supposed to be done? Yes, it is. And there's the authority for what we do. All right, I appreciate you listening, and I hope it's helpful. Just a lot of it's by way of reminder. We have studied these things in the past. We always need to keep it fresh in our minds as to the authority for what we're doing. We're going to sing a song of invitation here at the close of the lesson. And as we do this, as we always do, we want to encourage everybody to do some self-examination, make sure you're right with God. If you need to obey the gospel, the simple gospel plan of salvation, we want you to do that. If you need help understanding what you must do to be saved, ask a word, ask a question. It can be easily arranged. The study can be provided instantly. But if you're ready to make that decision, we hope you will without delay. If you're a Christian already, you need the prayers of the saints, let us know while we stand and sing this song.